My name's Gigi Lake. My husband Phil and I live on Little Wolf Creek. When Teresa told me about this meeting, I just asked her if we could just have a quick blessing over this meeting. I've just been asking the Lord to touch my eyes so that I could clearly see what is presented, touch my ears so that I would hear, touch my mind so that I could comprehend, touch my voice so that I would only speak politely, and to touch my heart so that I could conduct myself in a manner that was pleasing to Him. And I just want to offer that to each and every one of you, and just ask, Lord, we just ask that you please just bless this meeting, Lord. Keep everybody safe, traveling to and from, and just have everybody listen and gather all the knowledge that is needed, Lord. We ask this in your name. Amen.
All right, thank you very much, Gigi. My name is Teresa Martin, and my husband and I live on Little Wolf Creek Road. We've lived there about 20 years. And if any of you knew Mr. Glenn Roundtree, we live on the farm that's next to Glenn. A lot of you knew Glenn. Anybody know? Yeah, all right. That's where we live. The reason that we're here tonight is the U.S. Forest Service, as you're probably aware by now, they've got a big logging project that they're going to be doing over the next 40 years. And it's going to cover the areas, I think, of Little Wolf Creek on down to Kinsey Hollow, Black Oak, over to Jellico Creek, and on over into Whitley County. Well, my husband and I found out about this through Kentucky Heartwood, and they're going to have some time on the agenda today, as you can see from the agenda. We found out about it, and we have only been here 20 years, unlike lots of you who've been here, gosh, some of you your whole lives. And we didn't understand what it meant. So we went over, we talked to Mr. Reed and Mr. Hall to learn what this meant. And we were concerned because this is just a big change for us. And they were very helpful. And then we came back and we started asking our neighbors who lived here their whole lives, well, what do you think of all this? And what we found out was that a lot of folks didn't know this was going on. And we thought, well, that's not good. We should all get together, have a meeting, and learn about this together. So we called up the Forest Service folks, and we said, let's have one big meeting, because they needed to have a meeting anyway. They have a scoping meeting that they do where they invite our input. And they come and they listen with us. So rather than having two different meetings and da-da-da-da, we decided to collaborate and have one big meeting. So that's why we're here today. So I think it's important, before we all get started, to mention a couple things. One, that I think is important, is that we are all part owners of the National Forest. This land is owned by the people. I own it, and the Forest Service folks own it, every single one of you. We're all part owners of this land. And the Forest Service, we say it all the time, well, that National Forest, that's government land. It's government managed. They're the stewards of it. But we own it, the people. And it's for all of us. And the Forest Service folks have a very, very, very hard job because they have to manage this land as what's called multi-use or multi-purpose, which means they're trying to balance, and we just talked about this, all sorts of different interests. So they have to manage it for hunting and recreation and clean water and old growth and young growth and all these different things. And all of us have an opinion on how this land should be managed. I have an opinion. It doesn't even match my husband's opinion. So I guarantee you my opinion is not going to match all of yours, and all of yours is not going to match probably anybody else's. So it's a hard job these guys have, and women. But they're here to listen to us, and we're here to participate in this, and it is a requirement that they listen and that it is our right to participate. And so that's why we're here today. Now, I've talked to some of you, not all of you, and my fellow organizers have talked to some of you, and what you keep telling us is you think the U.S. Forest Service folks, and please don't take offense, but they're going to not pay attention to what we say, and they're just going to pretend to listen to us, and then they're going to go back and do it the way they want. And they're going to listen to the experts that they've got, and they're not going to allow us to participate. And I'm here to say I am pretty sure that's not true. And the reason is they have told us repeatedly, we want to listen to you. Mr. Reed said this. We will listen to you, and we will allow you to participate, and we will consider your input, and hopefully modify the plan to take our input into account. So I want you to join in with me in that faith that this democratic process that we are all a part of is going to matter. And that's why we're here tonight, because I believe this. And I am hopeful that the Forest Service guys, when they stand up here, and girls, pardon me, will tell you the same thing. So, as you can see on the agenda, the Forest Service folks are going to talk for 30 minutes, and we want to listen really, really well to what they're going to say. Listen, as Gigi said, with an open mind and an open heart, and let's learn. And then, the next part, as you can see, is 10 minutes. This organization called Kentucky Heartwood is going to talk. And the reason we found out about this was through Kentucky Heartwood. And they're the one organization in Kentucky that is chartered. Their sole purpose is to protect public land. That's what they're here to do. And they're going to have a different viewpoint. We want to listen well to what they say as well. And then we're going to have 45 minutes for all of you to participate. And we've got a timekeeper. Where's Allie? There she is. Each of you who want to speak tonight will have 2 minutes, and we'll time you to make sure that each person who wants to speak has a chance. Now, we only have one microphone, so we're going to, and we've never done this before, so we'll see how you want to do it. If you can stand up and be loud enough so everyone can hear, you won't have to come up. We'll try and make sure that there's 45 minutes for all of you to give comments. All right. Does that sound like an okay way to do it?
Yeah.
Good. All right. All right. So I am pleased to move this along for the next 30 minutes, and Allie's going to start a timer here when they start talking. I would like to introduce Mr. Tim Reed and Mr. John Hull. I think they need to get their laptop up and going. They're going to talk with you about what the Forest Service is planning. They've got a map up here. They've got other experts in the room that they brought. And Tim Reed, as you can see, he's the Daniel Boone Ranger manager. So he's the head of the Daniel Boone Stearns Ranger District. And then John Hull is a silviculturist, and that means he's a forestry expert. He's also the project manager. So I would like to have you join me in a warm welcome for Mr. Tim Reed and Mr. John Hull.
Can everybody hear me if I don't use the mic?
Yeah.
I talk pretty loud. Can't hear me, just wave your hand and I'll talk louder. All right. But first of all, I just want to say thanks to everyone for attending. This is a great turnout. This is one of the better turnouts we've had, I think, in some of these community meetings that I've ever been a part of. So I really appreciate everybody coming. Real briefly, another thing, I just want to really thank Smart and all the folks in the Wolf Creek area for putting this on. They've done a lot of work on this to make sure everybody has an opportunity to participate. So I really appreciate that. Honestly, it's good work. But as far as what we wanted to do tonight, it's basically kind of threefold. We want to give a little information about the proposed action that's currently being scoped right now, and talk a little bit about that, make sure everybody understands what's being proposed. And then we will try to answer some questions. If anybody has questions about it, questions that we can at this stage. We're very early into the process, so there may be things that the analysis will show later on that we won't have the answers to right now. But we'll do the best we can to answer your questions. And then, as Teresa alluded to, we're here to listen. We want to hear your comments and discussion, your concerns. When we put a project out for scoping, public scoping out, that gives us an opportunity to get issues developed that we can address in the analysis. So that's a big part of what we want to do. And I just got a couple other things I want to mention, and then I'm going to turn it over to John. He's going to go over some of the details of the project and a little bit better description of what's being proposed. But I just want to hit real quick. how did we get to this proposal? And why? So, a couple of years ago, in 2020, we started doing an assessment using our integrated resource management strategy process. And what that is basically is we go out and we look at existing conditions on the ground, and that gives us a baseline of what the existing condition is, and we start looking and comparing that to what our forest plan and other documents tell us we should be managing for out on the landscape. So you have, if there's differences in that existing condition versus that desired condition, it gives you opportunities that you can propose projects to move the existing condition closer to that desired future condition. And that's where the proposal came from. One of the items that was recognized here is this area, this analysis area, we just call it the Jellico project analysis area. John has more probably numbers than I do, but it's a little over 19,000 acres. And one thing we really saw was that it has a lot of maturing forest. Not been a lot of work done in this area over the last several decades. So you were seeing a lot of mature forest, and one of the needs was to try to balance some of the age classes so we don't have components of the forest be all mature. We don't want it all mature, we don't want it all young. We want to balance, have some diversity out there. So part of the purpose of this project, the purpose of the project, is to implement our forest plan direction and provide for some more balance as far as age classes. And we do treatments in that to try to establish some younger age forest, which in turn creates some mid-age forest, and still maintain a large amount of mature forest. This area is older area as far as the age class of the forest is getting older. It's going to continue to get older. It's going to you'll see a little bit of some of the that information that John will present to you, but that is the main purpose and need here, is to try to provide some diversity across this area and make sure it's not all in one age class. So, a little bit about the process. We have these handouts out there, and hope everybody will try to grab one and look at it, see if they wanted one. It shows a little bit about our process. And on one side you see the plan to project, which is what I described under the IRMS. That's how we got to the proposed action. Now, we're going into planning and analysis under our National Environmental Policy Act requirements, or NEPA, as we call it. So, and part of that is to get public input. And that's part of what we're doing here, is try to get public input on this. Key thing on this is we're early in the process. We're just starting. This helps us form issues, which can help form the shape the analysis, drive alternatives, and things like that. That's where we're at. And as far as the timeline, what we're looking at is we generally try to be at a decision point in a project like this within a year from the time that the scoping starts. So probably sometime in June, we'd like to try to get out a draft environmental assessment for review, and that will go out to the public for the next review point that the public will have opportunity to provide input to that point. So that's kind of where we're at. Please take a look at that. If you have questions, later, you can always contact us later about any of the NEPA process questions. There's some good information on the back of that as well. The only thing I want to mention, the last thing I want to mention before I turn it over to John, is the reason for the scale of this project. The project came out about 9,800 acres of those treatments. Not all of that commercial. Some of it will be non-commercial. That's a big number to throw out there. And caveat to keep in mind is that's over a 40-year period. That's not a project that we say, okay, if we make a decision there, we're going to implement that within 2 years. So it's a big number, so why would we throw out a big number? I've been doing this a long time, and I knew very well throwing out a number like that is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. People are going to have questions and sensationalize that number somewhat, So why do it that way? Well, I really felt like it's important to show what it's going to really take to get from existing conditions to that more desired condition of having some balanced age classes in our forest. And we felt like we needed to project that out 30 or 40 years to be able to show how that's going to work and what it's really going to take. It's nothing you're going to do in a decade or two, of treatments. Because we also have other limits of what we can implement in given periods of time under our forest plan. In our waters, in a fifth order watershed, we're limited on some of the treatments that regenerate stands to 5 to 6% of the area. If you look at this project, basically some of the treatments that would regenerate stands are taken back to 0 age class and start them over. We're limited on this project area to about, the math figures out to about 800 acres in a 10-year period. If you start breaking it down on what we'll actually implement, it's much smaller than it sounds when you throw out 10,000 acres, or it's actually 9,800. So think about it in that term, that it's scaled. So we just want to make sure everybody understands all that. And really wanted to do it this way so we could be transparent and make sure that folks see what it takes. We could have come out with smaller projects, over time. We probably wouldn't have got the same response. To me, that just wouldn't be fair enough to show what it really is going to take to do the work. And 40 years is a long time. Depends on your age, I guess. But think about how much could change in 40 years. Realistically, we know there's probably going to be lots of things change that will alter this project in the future. But by proposing this way, at least you're getting a picture of what it will take long term. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. And John, you come up. John's going to give us some more information on this proposal itself. Then we'll get to the good part, discussion and questions.
All right, I'm just going to really kind of go through all the different treatments that are proposed here. There's the actual harvest activity, and then there's also the intermediate treatments.
Yeah, talk louder. No one can hear you.
You might need the full mic.
I need to talk quietly.
All right. Okay, I'll start over. I'm going to go through some of the treatments that are proposed. The commercial stuff, timber harvest, we've got that, and then there's a lot of other intermediate treatments as well. So as far as the harvest operations, there's 5 of them, 4 main ones. Salvage is a little different, but you've got clear cut, 2H shelter wood, deferment, harvest, and thinning. Those are the acreages there. Comes out to 97, 96. In reality, it'll be lower than that. There's a lot of other restraints and stuff that we have to take care of or implement this stuff for a plan. There's a whole slew of restrictions essentially that we have to abide by. The clear cut, I think everybody knows what that is. You're cutting 100% of the trees out there. It creates an even aged, young forest, immediately full sunlight environment. 2H shelter wood, you're cutting about 85–90% of the trees out there. You're leaving a overstory of scattered trees that creates some vertical, a little bit of vertical structure allow for some seed for wildlife and for seed source for regeneration. Regeneration being seedling saplings regenerate from seed. Deferment harvest, you're cutting about 70–80% of the trees. The overstory, and one harvest, 10 or 15 years later, you're coming back and removing what's left, the other 20 or 30% that you left the first time. And that creates a 2H stand for about 10 or 15 years while the understory is regenerating. And then after you remove it, it'll be similar to what a 15-year-old cliff looks like. Next slide. Thinning, you're cutting about 50% of the overstory. It'll create a 2H stand. You'll have, 50% of the overstory gone. Obviously, you'll have trees regenerating under there. Salvage is a little different. It's kind of all over the place. It's dependent on the disturbance and the intensity of the disturbance. If you had just massive blowdown, a storm came through and knocked down 20 acres, when you'd salvage that, it would be essentially 100% harvest. If you had a wildfire go through somewhere and kill 40% of the overstory, harvest the dead and dying, get them out of there, and then you'd still have another 60% of the overstory left. So the results of these things, once fully implemented, clear cut, young stand, 2H shelter wood, you're going to have young forest with a little bit of vertical structure scattered throughout. Urban harvest, you're going to start out with 2H stand, and it's going to shift to a even age stand. Young forest moving towards mid-age, because it's 10 or 15, once it hits 30 years, it's kind of considered mid-age, at least in forestry terms. Thinning, you'll have a 2H forest, and then salvage, it's going to be, like I said, kind of all over the place, depending on the disturbance. So the intermediate treatments that are occurring kind of behind the scenes of all this stuff are really kind of what drive, they push the stand in the direction you want it to go. The harvest is the main thing. It helps pay for all these other treatments because you have to pay for these. But they're critical of actually successfully implementing the thing. If you just go out there and do a harvest and then walk away, you're probably not going to have the desired result. Let's go to the next one. So crop tree release, that's crop tree is a desirable tree in a stand. We usually do these types of treatments in younger stands, 10 to 30-year-old stands. Usually 15, 20-year marks nice. But, you're looking at a stand, say it's got 4-inch trees. A desirable crop tree might be white. So you've got a white oak tree here, you've got a red maple, a yellow poplar, and a sweet gum. So the idea behind the crop tree, you're releasing that thing, so you're cutting those other 3 trees. Cut them, treat them with herbicide, maybe both, depending on what kind of species they are. Get them on the ground, and then that white oak can continue to grow, expand its canopy, get a little height growth, a little diameter growth, and then you can do that throughout that entire stand. Site prep, it's designed to prep the stand, pre or post harvest for regeneration. So regeneration being after everything's cut, you want your stump sprouts to come back. That's your next age class. They look new trees for the future. So usually we do it after harvest, but certain scenarios might warrant doing it before and after. It depends on that specific stand. Mid-story removal is kind of similar to site prep. Mid-story, generally speaking, consider all the trees with about the 1-inch diameter size. 1 inch being 1 inch breast height. Up to about 8 inches in diameter, roughly. Like I said, kind of very generally speaking, that's what it is. So in a mid-story removal, you would either treat those trees with herbicide or cut them, depends on the species. For oaks, you're going to probably cut them, get some resprouts. For non-desirable species like red maple or something, you treat them with herbicide, or maybe just stump tree, you cut them and squirt them. The idea behind that is you would do that about 6 to 12 years before a harvest. Cultivate existing oak regeneration. Say you've got some oak regeneration being seasoned, 1 to 4 inches, 1 to 4 feet tall, say. You cultivate that. So if you already have it there, you're getting rid of that mid-story, so you're increasing the light that's getting down the forest floor. And over 6 to 12 years, those trees grow up, and once they get to a certain height, 4.5 feet tall or greater, then it's time to remove the overstory and either a 2H shelter wood or clear cut and release all those seedlings you can cultivate for the past 10 years. Grapevine control and NNIS or invasive species control are kind of similar. You're essentially getting rid of an unwanted plant. Grapevines, they're out there, they're everywhere. They're not usually an issue. In some certain areas, though they are, they will degrade a stand. They can drastically reduce growth. And in some areas, it looks like a kudzu patch if it gets bad. Essentially, grapevine control is something you would implement if you had a stand that had a serious grapevine problem. You would implement that pre-harvest, and then if you don't, after you harvest it, you've got grapevine everywhere. They essentially ride the trees up, and they'll be on top of the canopy, restricting the growth of the entire stand. So you may have areas areas like grapevine can be thrown, if you're doing a crop tree release, for example, you've got a grapevine problem in that stand, you go ahead and do grapevine treatment and your crop tree simultaneously. And that can be done with or without herbicide. The treatment methods vary, depends on the stand, depends on when your order of entry is. Invasive species control, same type of deal. We're finding invasive species issues, we want to treat them. When we know that there's an area, one of these areas is proposed for harvest, and we already know there's something in there, we're going to pre-treat ahead of time, go back, reassess. If it's successful treatment and you harvest, keep an eye on it, and you may have to do a post-treatment. Just especially in tree of heaven, it's down there and it's tough to get rid of. And you could also lump that in with, if you're doing your site prep, you've already got a crew in the woods, you're already paying for the work, so you do your pre-harvest invasive species treatment. You do your harvest, you come in after that, you do site prep and invasive species control again to go ahead and hit it again. So what Tim was talking about, age classes, and the overall purpose of this project is to balance the age class distribution across this area. And mainly there's a 2,200 acre designated old growth area down there at the bottom that's nothing's proposed in there. We don't do much in those areas for a variety of reasons I'm not going to get into tonight. But the remaining 17,000 acres is comprised of what's called our 1K habitat diversity emphasis area, which is essentially a wildlife habitat area. That's where pretty much 90% of our, probably more than 90% of our timber harvest occur in that 1K prescription area. And this is also about the forest plan, which is a big book that essentially tells us what to do and how to do it. Anyways, across that 17,000 acre area, currently, it was the top left one, that's what our data indicates the age classes are. Most of it's in that 80 to 130 year age class and trending. If you go through each one, it's 10 years coming out at 40 years towards the bottom. And that's what you'd have if you just did nothing, left it alone, walked away, and hunted it, watched it, whatever, rode the roads. You'd end up with about 85% of it that's 81 years old and older, and 65% of it is 131 years old or older. Eventually, once it hits a certain age class, once you get to the 200 plus year age class, everything is, really 150, but everything kind of starts to become homogeneous. If you have a similar condition across the entire landscape, it's going to vary by aspect. Some sites are drier, different species compositions, but it's going to become more and more uniform. So under this project, if everything, the stars aligned and everything was to go perfect and it was implemented exactly as we thought it was going to be, 100% of that area that's on the map was actually treated, then this is what it would theoretically do to the age class. You would, at the end of the day, you would have, after 40 years from now, you would have your 0 to 30 and everything fairly even. You're going to have more. You're always going to have stuff in the oldest age class. It's the way the land lays. You've got riparian areas and all kinds of other areas that we don't operate. We really only operate on 50% or less of the entire national forest. So we have 700,000 acre forest. You got 350,000 acres that might be operable. Then you start deducting other areas that are inoperable, inaccessible. That kind of thing starts to really wheedle down. Anyways, under this scenario, the design of the forest plan and the objective for that 1K area that I described is to have 17 10-year age classes. So you got 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and so forth, all the way up to 170 plus. And this would get it partly there, but you're still going to have stuff even though this goes way into the 220-year-old age class. A lot of that stuff, but everything gets old and it just sits there, obviously. That's about it. That's all I have to say. Thanks for listening.
Kentucky Heartwood is going to come up. We're going to have to change the computer, so this is going to take just a second. And Timmy, where's my husband? Timmy? Can you help with the computer? All right, so while they're doing the changeover, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Kentucky Heartwood is going to spend 10 minutes giving their perspective, and it is going to be a different viewpoint, and I think that's important that we hear all the viewpoints, and then we're going to hear all of your viewpoints, which will probably be different as well. They're going to talk for 10 minutes. Kentucky Heartwood is a national forest watchdog group. That's what I call them. And they seek to protect and restore the integrity, stability, and beauty of Kentucky's native forests. Mr. Jim Shuck will speak for Kentucky Heartwood. He is an ecologist who has extensively studied Kentucky forests in particular. He's an expert on our area. He's an ecosystem management expert, and he knows a lot about invasive species. So if we are almost ready, you want me to, let's help me welcome Mr. Jim Shuck, and we will let you
I've only got 10 minutes, and of course there's way more to talk about than 10 minutes would allow. But I first want to say that while professionally I end up in a lot of disagreements with folks in Forest Service, it's kind of where we're coming at these things from, or different roles. I've known and worked with a lot of these folks for a long time, and I like them all personally. Nobody here is bad. There's a number of different things that are true here that seem to conflict, and the hard thing is trying to tease out how to best manage for these things that seem to conflict so that we can come away with something that's best for the land and best for the people and the wildlife that use the forest. And a lot of these disagreements come down to two things. One is that we don't know exactly what the landscape looked like 200, 300, 400 years ago, but our best understanding of our forests is that most, at least half of the forest condition would have been in something we would call old growth. But the rest of the forest would be impacted by different types of disturbance that create young forests and openings that are really important for wildlife. And so we have this conflict where we have almost no old growth on the landscape, and yet we also have a number of wildlife species that do need these disturbance habitats. These species are declining. So the question is, what do you do about that? So without getting too technical, one thing I do want to say, John's done a great job in the scoping document of laying out the rationale and the age classes. But one thing I want to point out is my background is an old growth ecologist. I studied old growth in the Daniel Boone, my graduate work at EKU. So I've looked at this stuff for a long time. And our best old growth forests in Kentucky that we've researched extensively, a lot of the trees there are over 300 years old. And those forests between 130 and 300 years old, they do keep changing, and they become different, have different characteristics. And so when we're looking at it, we're thinking just in terms of these balancing age classes, that endpoint for consideration shouldn't be how do you balance between 0 and 170. At very least it should be 0 to 300 plus, and then figure out what that looks like. That would be a better approximation of what we understand that the landscape looked like. And one of the concerns we have with this project is that the way it's designed and the way it's laid out, while there will be some forests on the landscape over time that many would still consider mature, it really makes it so that very little potential old growth will be able to develop on the landscape. And what is there will be largely fragmented, except for that one section along the Tennessee line. I could talk about the old growth aspects all day, but I'd probably bore you all and take up all the time. What I wanted to talk about, though, is what some of these things look like from other projects and what some of the concerns that we have with how some of these things get implemented. And I know that these are also some of the current concerns we've been hearing from some residents who we've been talking to. On the next slide. Click it one more time. There we go. So this is a shelter wood cut on the Daniel Boone and the Red River District over in Whitley County to illustrate what it looks like. So while this project doesn't have a lot of official road building, on these really steep slopes, there's a lot of these skid roads or bulldozed back and forth and very few trees are retained. And one of the things we've observed and been disagreeing with the Forest Service for a while now about is landslides happening in the Redbird District on these very landslide-prone slopes. And the problem is that the Forest Service abides by the state best management practices, which are good, but when you're in very steep landslide-prone landscapes, when you bulldoze a lot of these skid roads and remove most of the trees, that leaves these lands way more susceptible to landslides or types of mass wasting when we have major rainfall events, which we seem to be having more and more. We've documented more than a dozen of these landslides in that area. You can click the next one. And the other thing that's worth mentioning is that while some of the trees are left, a lot of the trees, especially on these steep slopes where it really is difficult to get the timber out, a lot of the trees that get left are severely damaged and are going to die over time. Next. So this is a landslide we found back in March over Jackson Creek. It starts up on the road, Wolf Knob Road, and goes all the way down to Jackson Creek. Walked down the whole thing. It's in a stand that was cut in the 1990s, and I think it's just illustrative of how erodible and unstable a lot of these slopes are. Next, Tim. Here's another view of it. It's hard to show. It's really long. Went down the whole thing, busted a finger. Next. And this is down towards the bottom where this was next to the landslide, but you can see that exposed dirt and rock is where the ground's just slumping down. It's just illustrative how unstable a lot of these slopes are. Next. And I found this interesting, so I learned from Teresa and Tim about the flooding on Jackson Creek this last July, and as I was realizing this was the same area as that landslide, and like I said, those two things are directly connected. Click the next one. But, these are, one more click, play. And so, you can just click yes. And so there's these real concerns, and it is tough. How do you do forest management, disturb the landscape, even if it's necessary, without leaving the land exposed to these hazards and these risks? Because we are going to get more huge rains, and it is a big risk. And the basic best management practices just don't do enough to address it. So I put this map together to also try to put some of this in context at a landscape scale instead of just numbers. And I know John made this really good map. I've tried to make it a little more stark. If you look here, so the red areas are all these different regeneration cuts. So that's the shelterwood, clear cut, deferment cut. They're all different types of pretty much the same thing. The yellows are some of the thinning. But I had all these purple spots. What those are areas that were clear cut in the 80s and 90s. And so when you start looking at it in that context, you see there's going to be huge areas of the landscape that just are going to have no mature forest at all for the next many, many, many years, next century at least. And then it'll be kind of mixed in those other areas. Next. So I put a few of these images together to kind of bring in a little bit some areas that folks might be familiar with to be able to really show sort of the scale and intensity of some of what's proposed. So this is on Bunch Branch, Little Wolf Creek. And so the kind of brighter green background is national forest land. The red hash stuff is all those the clear cut, shelterwood cuts. Pink are the things that were clear cut 80s and 90s. And the yellow hash marks are the thinning and non-commercial thinning, so you see some of that overlaps with areas that were cut previously. But so you can look at like this holler here, that whole chunk of national forest is pretty much clear. Oh wow. Okay, next with the tour. So here's Ryan's Creek Mountain. Again, the same type of thing. You'll see there's going to be almost no mature forest left on the mountain, especially on the south side. That's Ryan's Creek down in the valley there. Next, in the Wolf Knob area. And again, when you start looking at these areas that were cleared, cut in the 80s and 90s, and you put that in context, you sort of get the idea of the scope here. Next. And then this is the other side of Mackenzie Hollow. And I think what's important here is what I think a lot of folks know is that there's a lot of logging going on in the area on private land. I mean, that's normal, that happens, it's gonna keep happening. And if you look at aerial images, satellite, you can really see the extent of it. So we're talking about habitat for birds, deer, et cetera. There's a lot of this log disturbed forest habitat on the landscape. But if you take that national forest land and you clear all that adjacent to it, you're gonna have no mature forest in that area, really at all. And the other big problem is, and I know that some of the goal of this project is to remedy some of it, but most of this stuff that was cut in the 80s and 90s is in really bad shape, and Jellico is especially a tree of heaven, which is an invasive species. It hasn't been controlled since these things were cut 30, 35 years ago, and now these trees are in the canopy. In some areas they're even dominant, they're seeding out, it's all over, and it's a huge problem. And so when you do these big cuts, you end up with a lot of problems with invasive species. And if you don't take care of it immediately and in the future, down the road again and again, you're going to have these forests degrade further and further. Now, just say about what's lost. I mean, I love old growth. I also love disturbed habitats. I love seeing a windstorm fire. I love seeing what those things do on the landscape. I think what happens naturally can be different than when you use bulldozers and punch in a bunch of stuff. And it can make it a little bit different. But my time is up. So that was a lightning round. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Okay, so very different perspectives. And again, I think these perspectives are going to mirror your perspectives. So we saw on our Facebook page, one guy said, cut every tree down. That's best for wildlife. And then another guy came on and said, don't cut any of them. That's best for wildlife. So this is what democracy is, and when we have lots of folks, lots of different viewpoints. The Forest Service folks are in charge of stewarding this land, and we are here to give them our input so that they can shape the plan. And we are going to do this respectfully, and I know many of you have passionate views about this, and passion is fine, but we will be respectful to our Forest Services and to each other, because we're not even going to agree. All right. Does that sound okay? Everybody can do that, yeah? Sure you can. All right. All right. All right. So the way we're going to do this is, and we have the timekeeper, and you see what a great job she did. She's chopping people off. You're done. Your 10 minutes is up. Allie is going to time us and time you, and you get 2 minutes to say what you want to say. And you get 2 minutes to either make a comment, make a suggestion, or ask a question. And if you ask a question, the responder, it can be Kentucky Heartwood, it can be John, it can be Tim, it can be one of the experts. They brought a bunch of hydrology and biologists. They'll have 2 minutes to respond. And we'll keep this moving so everybody gets a chance. Now, before we get into this, I want to also point out, and I'm hoping y'all have it, that there's forms that the U.S. Forest Service folks gave you where you could write written comments as well. Some people don't want to talk in public, and that's great, that's fine. And they're on the table outside. If you don't have one, there's pens, and you can turn them in. The Forest Service folks left you a box out there, and they will be reading those and transcribing them and taking those, so we can trust that. So put your comments down. Feel free to do it that way if you want. There's also a website, I'll put it up at the end, where you can submit your comments electronically. There's already a bunch on there, and you can read what other people already said, so this is an open process. All right, so enough of that. Who would like to go first?
I will. I'm
All
going.
right, sir. Would you like the microphone?
No. He said that they may spray with herbicides. There's a few of us in here that's been exposed to the government's herbicide, Agent Orange. Well, I'd like to know, is my family going to be in trouble because of their herbicides they're going to use?
All right. Who would like to answer the question? Or is that people like you? Come on up.
Yeah,
All right, come on.
briefly address that. One thing to remember is, we're starting the analysis, and herbicide use will be fully analyzed in the process. Shoot. Well, that's okay. It will be analyzed in the process, is all I'm telling you that will happen. And obviously, we're going to use the bare minimum necessary to achieve results with that. So we use herbicides in forestry practices, all across the country, and in certain situations it can be a good result.
Wait your time, sir. Please wait your time.
John, or anybody got anything else to add?
Please wait.
Exposure is gonna be dependent on,
There's no broadcast herbicides being
the only
applied.
reason, the only way you physically be exposed is if you're out there at the time of application.
Well, as I said a while ago earlier, there's some of us been exposed to it. And we're living the life of what happened with the government sprayed vegetation in Vietnam. And I can't think of any herbicide that you could use that is going to not cause human or health problems. Because you haven't got it yet.
All right, so I will also remind folks that this is being recorded, and the Forest Service folks will have this on the recording, so they can go back and replay and reassess the comments that are being made and take these very seriously.
Well, my name is Don Netters, and I live on Rhymes Creek. If you want to know who I am.
Mr. Netters, thank you. Thank you for your comments, sir. All right, this gentleman in the back wanted to say something, and I maybe not so gently cut him off. Would you like to make a comment, sir?
Just asking what kind of herbicides are they gonna be using, Roundup or what?
So the question is, what kind of herbicide will you use, Roundup or what?
Depending on the treatment, what we're treating, generally speaking, as we're
We can't hear. Teresa, can you repeat that, what he said?
John, I think the Forest Service folks need to come up and talk through the microphone.
Yeah.
I apologize. And again, we're just figuring this out as we go.
So it depends on the type of treatment, what you're treating, that kind of thing, as to what's actually used. Our most commonly used herbicides are triclopyr, glyphosate, which is Roundup, and Darlon. Comes as a variety of names, but it's a herbicide that kills all the water that's in the grass. We also use a Mazapir. And under this project, we would use anything that's not prohibited by the forest plan. So it's 2,4-D is prohibited by the forest plan, and there might be one or two others. We're not using anything restricted. These are herbicides, not pesticides. Pesticides are way more dangerous than herbicides. That's what they're using. They're spraying crops with and that kind of thing. Most of them biodegrade in a matter of weeks or months.
Okay, this gentleman here has a question. He's raised his hand. Could you please, well, no, you don't need to. Go ahead. I'll repeat.
So related to the first question, with the herbicides or whatever you're spraying with, runoff into the creek. Yep. Poor fish, newts, whatever, lizards, wildlife, and also people who irrigate using the creek for crops. And play in the creek. Our children love to go to the creek on summer day.
Would you like a response, or was that a
Oh,
comment?
yeah.
All right.
Think about it.
Someone from the Forest Service, please.
So everything's applied according to the label, which anybody can read. Forestry applications are typically in a wooded setting. It depends, but the gist of it is these types of impacts that you're referring to are going to be, they're the next phase of the NEPA. We conduct our environmental assessment. That's when we look at all the impacts, say herbicides will be one of them. We'll be analyzing those impacts, and we'll be disclosing the environmental assessment, the draft goes out, and everybody will have a chance to comment on that. So at this stage, I'm not going to stand here and speculate on specific impacts or which trees or anything like that.
Okay. Well, the second part of my question was topsoil runoff. That's also recommended to treat. But
just soil in general?
Yeah. 'Cause
Right,
we're
we'll be
gonna
looking
replant,
at.
we're gonna have, yeah, I'll-
Hey, you all.
and then you have no, you have no carbon, you have no,
That's a valid concern, absolutely. And that's what I do. So I'm Claudia Cotton. I'm the forest soil scientist for the whole forest. And this is Mac Cherry. He's the forest hydrologist for the whole forest. And so, yes, erosion and pesticides or herbicides are a valid, absolutely a valid concern. And so as far as the herbicides go, well, no, I need to say something. I need to address something about that though, and about them going to the creek. So there are very specific herbicides that we have to use in riparian or streamside zones. They're very restricted. And we also have guidelines that you can apply them within 6 hours of rain. And you can only apply them in soils that have a certain amount of clay in them, because if you put that stuff in sand, boom, guess what? It goes straight to the creek. But if you've got a little bit of clay in there, it can grab it and metabolize it and disperse it the way it's supposed to into the ground. So that's what we do. There are many things that we do to keep herbicides from getting into the creek to affect the aquatics. Now, as far as the erosion is concerned, we are very concerned about that. We do follow best management practices. We go to every single one of these units, and the botanist, Mac Cherry, and myself, we have climbed all over these units, looking for sensitive areas that have slid. We were looking for all kinds of areas to protect. So we're not taking this lightly at all, because we understand how important these resources are to all of us, you all. This is our forest, and we want to do right by it. This is our passion. We don't take this lightly.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's have another question.
There's a lot on this side of the room too.
Yeah, sorry. All right. Go ahead, you sir. One of you over there, please.
If I may come up your map in just a minute. My name is Dr. Alan Harrelson. I have a PhD in American history. I'm a college professor, and I own 170 acres of land right here on Oliver Creek. Your land butts up against mine. You're calling to clear-cut Little Rock Creek Mountain. What I want to know is, why is clear-cut necessary in the first place? What role does it play in regeneration at all? There was a state senator came to McCreary County a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and his visit was recorded in the McCreary County newspaper. He said McCreary County's best chance for economic improvement is tourism.
Yes.
He said, if we are to, he said, we have the same mountains, the same fall colors, the same trees that the Smoky Mountains does. We can be the next Gatlinburg. Well, that's almost a nightmare. But McCreary County does have beautiful old growth timber. You know what my PhD dissertation was about? Rural Kentucky, and how the federal government and corporate America has nearly destroyed the land in this state since the late 19th century. And I would challenge anybody to argue with me on that. I've spent years. I despise federal-owned initiatives. I don't like the federal government at all.
That's right.
And at the end of the day, whoever's even remotely considering approving this needs to be fired. That's all I've got to say.
And then you. Yes, sir.
Being an ex-employee of the government, I know a little bit about how the government works. First off, forest rangers, part of that job description, set up plans, sell lumber. I know that for a fact. Nobody here can deny that. That's part of the job description. And what I'm thinking is, what happened, we touched on it real quick. What happened to the forest 300 years ago when we weren't around to save them? I guess they must have taken care of themselves. Right? So, what I'm saying is, why are we interfering with what they do naturally anyway? So, I guess just with that point in mind, landslides, we live 25 feet away from the bottom of a mountain you're all gonna be working on. So, I definitely don't wanna see, you know, trees and crap on top of my house when I come home from work one day. So I'm worried about that, and I'm also worried about those, herbicides going into my drinking water. Cause I don't have city water, I got my own well. So you start putting that stuff in there, you are gonna get people sick, I don't care what kind it is.
Herbicides are used by public transportation department on the highways.
Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I'm listening, I'm sorry.
Herbicides are also used by the roads department on the highways a lot, and those flow into the creek as well. And so we're trying our best to keep that from happening. Thank you.
The only thing is I'm way in back, so I'm not worried about the roads. I'm at Ryder's Gap, where you're gonna be doing all that herbicide, mini cutting and all that stuff. You're gonna either wind up killing or close to it, because it's either gonna be a landslide or it's gonna be the herbicide to get it, but one of them's gonna get it. And believe me, I worked for the government long enough to know that they'll do what they wanna do and then beg forgiveness afterwards. I've seen it. I know it.
All right, I don't know if I'm picking the right people. This gentleman over here. Mr. Janiga. Yes, sir.
Hi guys, so I'm Sean. I don't actually live in this infected area at all. I actually live just north of it. I just found out. Thank you for your help. But I had a couple questions because I do live up against the National Forest. Who's making money on this? Does the money go to the community and help the community at all? As being in the National Forest, why should we let this happen? And also, does any of the people that proposed all this actually live in this area? No.
All right.
No, the people who proposed this.
You would like a
Forest
response?
rangers, anything like that?
You would like a response? Why don't you stay up here, because I think that was a bunch of questions. So, who would like to answer that one?
First part about the commercial aspect of it, I'll speak to that real quick. As far as profit on this, any commercial sales that occur, you know, those funds go back into U.S. Treasury. But it does allow other funds to get used for reforestation, timber sale, stand improvement areas, and we also have some initiatives we're doing, stewardship contracting, which can allow funds generated from timber sales to stay on site in the area to be used for different non-commercial projects, such as the non-commercial thinning opportunities, could be non-native invasive species treatments and things like that.
That goes back to your guys' projects.
I'm sorry.
That sounds like that money just goes back to the same project, it just keeps getting cycled through.
Well, the follow-up treatments would, yeah. That can help pay for it. As far as profit, we don't worry about that. We're not profiting on any of that. You know, obviously, any commercial contract that goes to a contractor, they have to have a reasonable profit margin, or they're not going to be a business. They're not going to be a partner to be able to implement these things. But that's kind of, you know, the funds go back to Treasury and makes the things available for us to be able to do follow-up treatment.
I never see you guys out in the National Forest anyway. I've never seen a single person down our road. Not one.
I'm sorry.
We're all out of style. Anybody who's making money or doing anything that's actually living in this area. Okay, but does any of the National Forest people, any of you guys actually live in this area?
I don't think we have anybody that lives on Jellico Creek, yeah.
It's a lot more than Jellico Creek.
Well, this area, I'm not aware of.
Where do your loggers live, Tim?
Yeah, they live, they're scattered all over.
I'm one of the loggers.
I think
I'm one of the loggers, and I live on Ryan Street.
got 460 acres that joins that. I'm all for it.
Well, yeah, 460
Let's hear this, gentlemen. Let's have, would you like to, we
Oh, no.
don't have to come up.
No, ma'am.
Let's hear your point. We want to hear everybody's point. And you're a logger.
No,
Say it again.
I'm not a logger, I'm a purchaser.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm a procurement forester for Kentucky Heartwood lumber out of Somerset.
I'm all over.
See, you make money off of it, that's why.
Let's hear all
I
opinions.
logged 400 acres over on Ryan Creek in the 80s, well, to 84, 80 to 84. And, Got Carpenter just finished logging it again since I did. So it grows back fast. And when we reclaim, we don't use nothing but triple 10 and, straw and little lime.
My question is about access. What is the plan to access these areas? Do you get easements from people to go across their land to get on this?
The initial look and assessment of this area is not showing the need for any kind of easements like that I'm aware of. With the access that off existing Forest Service roads.
So I have a follow-up question to that. Does that mean most of the traffic will go up and down Jellico Creek Road? Is that what that means?
Depending on where the treatment is at, yeah, but it'd be on Forest Service roads, using any, right, yeah.
All right. This man in the back has been waiting a long time.
Are you guys going to
Actually,
take
hang on
and?
1 second, sir.
Okay.
Can y'all raise your hand that want to talk so I can figure out? All right, we're gonna go. Wow. All right, we're gonna sweep across this way. How about that? Steph, I know you're on the end here. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Are you just gonna take and to, people away from this area? Anybody that lives inside, close to that area that logs, or does any logging, or to have first benefits on all type of that work? You should bring somebody out of London or Lexington or somewhere like that in here, no matter they underbidded us, to let them do the logging and stuff because they've worked here before.
Yeah.
Nobody talks, and the higher things is another, but then select cut makes a big difference.
Right, yeah.
Just like he was talking about on Ryan's Creek, I worked this property, he was talking about here, just the second cut that come off of it. We didn't have to cut what they left, the bigger trees, they growed on up to where we put back and we left it, we just took certain ones.
Yeah, as far as the contracts, we have to follow federal contracting procedures on that, and they're put out for open bid. We can't really control
Like I'm
this
saying,
one.
that's what I'm saying.
Most of them are people from this general area in the region,
They were taking, it should be a certain distance regardless, it should be a radiation. And our miles is different than mileage across the road.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Can I come up for 2 minutes?
Yes. It's gonna be 2 minutes.
So my name is Julian Campbell. I'm from England. Sorry about that, but I've been here for more than half my life. Back in 1990, I wrote a report, Stearns District Biological Inventory, working with the Forest Service and Nature Conservancy. So my main concern in 1.5 minutes is the process in general and the language we use about planning the forest. It's confusing. Forest is complicated. The Forest Service is very complicated. It's hard to figure out what's really going on in the Forest Service, especially with the money issue. It should be simple, and I think there's a way forward to make it simple. It's a good meeting today, but we should have, you in Whitley County need a meeting like this every year to talk about this stuff. It shouldn't just be waiting every 10, 20 years.
Right.
So my main point is to do that and to link the Forest Service more with the community, because we're never going to figure out the right balance between taking stuff out and leaving it alone until we have a community deciding that together with the Forest Service. And that's just not happening. I thought it was going to happen when I wrote this report in 1990. And we had, 10, 20 years of talk. We had a good meeting in Knoxville with the Forest Service in 2011. We even played the bongos. We danced around and kumbaya. But it never really got hold. And I think if the Forest Service, and actually it should be probably led by the locals, so that they're not going to want to do it unless there's someone like Teresa to help spark it. And you've had these good discussions. It could be long, boring, nerdy science conversations, but it should also be trying to come up with a simple decision. I'll leave it at this, though. One of the simplest decisions then to make for Whitley County, or it could be the whole Upper Cumberland, for example, where do you want your old growth to be? There really is very little ancient old growth forest that's more than 130 years old. But probably most of us want to have some where it's older, like the Great Smoky Mountains. Where should that be? And that's the question we need to ask. There's not enough information in this plan about it right now.
Dave is next, I guess. Mr. Boyd?
Yeah. Long ago, when somebody went into log, they would usually only take the trees 14 inches or larger, and they left the rest of the forest alone. And when they were finished, you still had an intact forest with mature trees producing nuts and mast and acorns and beech nuts and all that stuff to keep the wildlife going. So I'm very opposed to clear cutting, especially on steep slopes. Some of you have seen it here and there, haven't you? Yep. And when you cut everything, there's already thousands and millions of plants that are already there, ready to spring up. And man, they really spring up. And so they form this dense jungle, which nothing can get through for a long time, years and years. So, and I find it disgusting. Clear cutting, especially on steep slopes, ought to be outlawed.
Thank you. All right.
Can I come up front?
Absolutely. Come on up.
My name is Johnny Neal. I live on Osborne Creek, which is approximately right there on the map. That's exactly where my house is. When I saw initially this was happening, it was 3 weeks ago. The original scoping document was, I believe, from either March or May. I don't exactly remember. So and that big of a time gap between the original scoping document, if I'm correct, which I believe I am, to now. But I have a couple of initial questions that I have for my area. A lot of Aquarium County, for instance, is in the Daniel Boone National Forest, which means land usage is very complicated, it's very particular. So a few of my questions are exactly how does this benefit Aquarium County and Whitley County as well economically, considering it is protected forest land that cannot be used. Things like roads, for example, we have a brand new connecting road between Pine Knot and Williamsburg going to be finished within the next 2 weeks or so. How does that affect our road usage? How does that affect, is it just Forest Service federal land roads, or is it public roads? And then also, how does it benefit each and every one of you guys sitting out here right now that want to know how all this land is going to be used? We just want some answers on exactly how it's going to be used, how it affects us, and how does it affect us 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years from now, as well as, next year, next couple of years. Because I think a lot of us are just frustrated because a lot of us are simply confused as to what's going on because we've had no input on this until 6 o'clock this afternoon. So we would just like to kind of get probably just the basics, I think, out of the way first before we go any farther with clear cutting or mid-story removal or all these other methods that we're not really clear on exactly what that is.
I think you would like a response on that, or would you like it to? Yes, sir. All right.
Go ahead.
So regarding, how are people benefiting? It's our loggers, they're operating in here, they've got to have somewhere to stay, they don't live around here. They're buying diesel, they're buying food, they're contributing to that. I mean, it's a broader, so there's a huge report that the state of Kentucky did about how much money logging generates, not only directly, but indirectly across the entire state. It's pretty interesting, it's a staggering number. That's the general benefit to the economy. You're changing wildlife habitat conditions, so some hunters prefer to hunt over certain types of conditions. As far as the roads are concerned, we use our Forest Service roads where they exist, and then we use county roads just like any other logger on private property.
And just to add to the road situation, the Forest Service does pay payment in lieu of taxes to the county. And under the Secure Rural Schools Act, Secure Rural Schools Roads Act, the payments made to the county for roads. So there are payments going into that. And then we can use those funds to fix up, roads that come from the timber sales themselves.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Bob.
I'll speak from the podium. And on the way, I'll start there. On the way, I'd like to point out that I'm having a few problems here. First of all, my wife's the timekeeper. She used to tell me when to shut up. Unfortunately, I'm now a bit old, so I have trouble hearing. We'll see how that goes. Also, be nice. Basically, I'm an engineer, so I'm not used to putting sugar on things. So I can make a few comments. First of all, on those tables, I realize they're not the actual tables to be used. What I can tell you is that if this is true, what we have now today, all the projections of how it's going to happen if we do nothing is wrong. Mathematically incorrect. And if that's going to be used for the basis of saying what the plan's going to be, then that's going to be absolutely wrong too. And not only that, but he talks about as if all the trees are the same. So they're going to choose 81 up to 130 as a baseline. That means all your poplars and most of the trees are already dead. Your oak trees and hickory trees, they're only about midlife, and they're only halfway through their life. So if you're going to cut them when they're not even mature yet, I see that as a problem. Basically, though, my biggest concern is, not surprisingly, clear cutting. And a lot of this has been said. I hadn't talked to anyone until, so I didn't have that other input. Basically, what you find is that either it's a good solution or a bad solution. And it seems they had good solutions and very bad solutions. The other thing that what made sense was, what I could read was that basically you look at it to say, if I'm going to clear cut, do I end up with better trees or worse trees than before? And I have a couple of concerns on clear cutting based on that. And one's already been mentioned, and that is erosion. Erosion's a problem. You look at your maps, the soils around here, go down this area and all around our farms, our soils are subject to erosion. It's not just It's not just landslides, it's erosion of the roads itself. And going to build new roads and that stuff, are you out of your mind? It's going to cost an absolute fortune. This whole project is a road construction. It's not going to work. Maintenance to all this. First of all, First of all,
maybe at the end you can have another turn.
Yes, if we get to the end, y'all can have a second turn. Everybody, let's give a round of applause. All right, who's next?
Teresa. Could a woman speak?
Oh my God.
Oh no.
Did you notice the women here? Did you notice?
Yeah, I know.
We're good.
I'm not very good at speaking,
You're wonderful.
but we appreciate all you forestry. We love you. You've got a job to do. Point is, it's your job. Who's telling you to do your job? The people we just voted for. Some of us didn't vote for them. They got in, so we couldn't help that. But that's the problem. Please, listen to us. Listen to your neighbors. We love you. You love us, or you wouldn't be around here. You wouldn't be doing this job. Listen to us, what we want. You tell them what you're going to do. You're not going to go by that big book. That big book will get you all in trouble someday. Everything that you cut off those mountains, everything flows downstream. You remember that. Everything flows downstream.
I'm here because I am concerned with Whitley County, and it's not my comment. She filed these comments specifically in the public record as written comments and just asked that they be read aloud at the meeting. So this is from Karen Supper, who is from McCreary County, and she and her son own approximately 91 acres in McCreary County, which is almost completely surrounded by the forests you are wanting to clear cut. From what I understand, you will be taking out all the trees, both old growth and smaller trees. And any trees you deem too small to bring a profit will be destroyed in the process. To what does this benefit? Has there been a study done by an independent agency to predict the impact of this project will make on this and surrounding areas? The soil erosion alone will fill the ditches and the beautiful creek flowing through this area, making the road into the area unpassable. You complain about the thickets in the area, and even the deer won't be able to travel through this area with all the treetops that will be covering the crown that you've gone through. From what I can see, your proposed project is that you want to destroy all the wildlife habitat, erode the soil, and basically make southern Kentucky look like a wasteland. The forest in McCreary County is what brings a lot of revenue to this area for hikers, campers, four-wheelers, hunters, bird watchers, and the list goes on. As a landowner, pretty much in the middle of the forest you plan to destroy, I wholly object to this project. Where does all the money go from the sale of these trees? I wish for my comment to be read aloud during the meeting on the 17th, and thank you.
All right, who's next? Yes.
I sure ain't no speaker, but we live over there on Olive Creek. Now, we got the prettiest view. I'm gonna bring them kids. No South Mountain. And then all them pretty leaves, on the top. And like them, that water comes down off of that mountain and goes all the way around our property. So that would just wash that stuff off. And my family, my husband, he's been a logger for many years. He cut that same mountain when he was in the road with that. He cut again to the city. So my son is a logger. He's just up the road along him now. But I don't want that cut down. It is such a beautiful place. People goes back up in there. My grandson, my husband, and kids, they got springs up there. And it's the cleanest, coldest water you can find. They go up there a lot of times, walk that mountain, just for that. Get us up water. Or sometimes they bring a canteen back. I give them a canteen. But it'd be a shame if you burnt such a beautiful place. Yeah, people go back on Rock Creek on them four-wheeler stuff. I ain't been on no four-wheeler, but we drive it, and come down on Jellico Creek. My husband cut timber on Jellico Creek, Ryan Creek, Canyon Creek, Wolf Creek. Hey, and he's not wanting to live me. Oh, he said, well, I'll probably get dead gone when it starts. We all might be, but he's 73, so he's not. But I believe that he needs to be my son and me.
part of the room. Sometimes people can face that way.
My wife and I teach at University of the Cumberlands, and we've been taking students in our classes, dendrology, ecology, biodiversity, and various courses out into the Forest Service roads for years, and we have been so blessed to have a beautiful area to take our students to. Virtually all of these areas are going to be impacted where we take our students to show them older trees. No, it's not old growth, but it's mature, it's beautiful, and it's been a real blessing to have that to share with our students. And I'm afraid that's going to change dramatically. No, it's not all going to disappear, of course not, but it really is going to change. And I don't think it's going to be a change for the good.
I'm Dan Moses. I own the Moses Holdings LLC on Jackson Creek, on Little Wolf Creek. I have a couple of questions and concerns. The first one is Jackson Creek bisects my property. My property line doesn't go to the top of the mountain on any of the three sides, and it's surrounded by Daniel Boone. So they're going to come across, and all of their stuff will end up in my creek. I'd like to know, have you done, I guess you've just now started the environmental impact statement, is that correct? What kind of curve number do you plan on using trying to determine the sediment load? Because if there's not an endangered species in Jackson Creek, there is in the receiving waters, Cumberland Darter. And I'd like to know how you're going to assess the sediment that's going to run down. That's the first question. The second one is when we were over at the Forestry Service office, I asked about a reforestation plan. And from what I gathered, it was kind of like it was going to happen naturally or something like that. That means that we're going to have like hundreds and hundreds of acres of autumn olive trees, because that's what's there now, because it was stripped back in the late 70s. It's an invasive species, and that's what's going to end up in the Daniel Boone National Forest. The third thing, I want to talk about the road. Asphalt has elasticity properties, like a rubber band, and if you have a heavy log truck going up a hill and it stays there for a long time, it's just like a rubber band that you hold like this. Pretty soon it won't snap back. If you look at the pavement there at the pilot station going into Wendy's, Long John Silver's, where it's like that, that's where those trucks have sat there. That's what's going to happen to the new road between Williamsburg and Pine Knot. So, there you go.
Response?
Matt Cherry, hydrologist, Daniel Boone, and I can at least speak to the first question you had, the sediment, and a lot of that does involve analysis and effects, and we're not to that phase yet. With that said, I'd like to still provide you some information, what I can. I can say for past analyses, I've used sediment models to model what type of erosion we're seeing at the current, and then after the proposed actions, what this estimated sediment would be at that, and show a percentage increase.
Is there like a plus or minus if it's over like a 20% or 30% increase that you can't do it, you gotta come up with something different?
We haven't established the threshold yet. They would consider that a threshold, and we haven't established that because we haven't done the analysis.
I don't wanna be.
The timeline of like the analysis and the environmental assessment.
Oh, yeah. We're shooting to have a draft environmental assessment out, probably sometime around June. Yeah, it's kind of June.
To follow up with what Max said, as far as if we do see something that's huge, like, you know, if an activity is going to cause a huge flood of sediment, we take that concern to the team, to the ranger, before anything gets put down on paper. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, is issue identification and trying to use those issues to modify this proposal.
I'd like to see it when it's done.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
Does the environmental impact study also take into, as Deb said, the
the ecology, not just the sediment, but the wildlife in the
Yes,
area,
ma'am.
such as the garter. We've got
Yes.
so many of the large woodpeckers. We've got, I had it in my head before I started talking. The bats,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, because we've got so much problem with the white nose affecting the bats, and we do have a lot of bats in the area, especially in some of these forest sections. Would you all take that into account, what the wildlife is in the area, and whether it's endangered, whether it should be protected?
100%, and our biologist is right here, Jeff.
Yeah, and then, the Endangered Species Act requires us to, write a biological assessment pertaining to all listed species. The National Forest Management Act, requires a biological evaluation, pertaining to regional forestry species.
So who will do the environment?
Yeah, that's me.
But yet you're paid by the government.
All right.
So he's a specialist.
I mean,
But
I mean,
they're
when you
telling
get
you
it.
they're telling you they want this done, and that's not, I guess that's my choice. I wish it was somebody independent.
Me too.
And just to add to that, we also have to have compliance and consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who is the regulatory agent for Endangered Species Act.
All right, let's see, this gentleman hasn't spoke, you, and then you, and then you, okay? And we're gonna need to do a time check in a second, go ahead.
Since no one has talked about the flooding in eastern Kentucky this summer, I think that's an important issue that we should be at least thinking about here. How many of y'all have been, since the flooding, to Breathitt County, Letcher County, and seen the devastation, and maybe helped out some of the people who've lost their homes? Absolutely heartbreaking thing to see. You know, to me, logging, strip mining, all contributes to flooding. And according to the Federal Government Office of Surface Mining, when you have a mature, healthy forest, it'll soak up 75% of the rainfall, 75%. And that logging and the stripping definitely contributed to the flooding in eastern Kentucky. And I think, you know, looking at this proposal, we really need to, you know, is that what we want for this area?
All right, out of respect for your time, let's just decide together. It's 7:26. We still have many hands. I want to say 5 or 6 people. If the Forest Service is willing to stay longer and you guys can start drifting away, but I think we should, if you want, we can listen to the rest of the comments.
If people choose to leave, if you didn't sign in, and you can just sign in real quick.
Right.
Leave, if you didn't already.
Okay.
And it's a problem.
So yes, please. When you're exiting, if you don't mind, please signing in on the sheet. That would be great. All right. So raise your hands. Who wants to continue? All right. And if you don't, Forest Service, you all right with continuing? Okay. All right. And then anyone who wants to start leaving, I mean, obviously you could have left any time. All right. Let's keep going then. Who's next? This gentleman's been trying to get a voice in.
My name's Johnny Beard. I live here on Austin Creek. And just a little bit about it, I've lived there all my life. My dad was a logger. He passed away. He worked for the Forest Service. He put out some of the spray and all that stuff. And within 10 years, he shook like this. And that's true. He's dead and gone now. Birdie is my neighbor. My dad, her husband worked together for years. I know about logging. I know people's lives, how they live, how they make it. But there's the right way, the wrong way to do it. And you know, I mean, Dad, he select cut 300 acres over a 20-year period. You couldn't tell when we left it from when we started. You know, what they're saying they're going to do, we'll never see the end of it. You know, I've got a son that's almost 18-year-old. He'll never see, when we've run this our whole life, he will never see this. You'll never see a mature tree back here again. I guarantee that. I have over 100 acres sitting right in here. And it's been stripped on one side, and I bought everything I could buy over the last 20 years. But 25 years after the stripper was gone, my mountain's sliding on. All of a sudden, I've lost fencing, I've lost all kinds of things going on. I've got a 20-foot hole in the middle of my mountain because of something they done when I was a boy. This will destroy this whole region for you. And I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, there's nothing, you know, I mean, I've got neighbors and friends here. They live here. That water will be tainted. There's nothing, I mean, I deal with this stuff all my life. You know, my dad does it, or did it for years. But at the same time, I'm a tree hugger. I love trees. I see rights and wrongs. I see how people do. You know, like one of these gentlemen said, they logged all their life. But there's a way to do it. There's a way to cut that timber, go in and select cut it. But what they're proposing ain't select cut. I mean, a tenth of it's going to be actually, if lucky, select. It just ain't right.
Hey, ma'am, we are the Donnie Love section on this map. We're right below that mountain. And we have deer twice a day come up in our yard, turkey, everything. Coyotes, coyotes in the night.
Yes, ma'am.
Come up.
Who has not spoken yet? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sheena Hasty, and I live on Osborne Creek Road as well. And I live in that valley on the creek. And I'm guessing the most beautiful parts of this forest is the clear-cut area that you're going to start with first, so that you can continue to fund this expedition here. And those are probably the oldest growth areas that are the most beautiful. And that's going to wash my valley out. I'm at the very beginning. There's one more property at the beginning of Osborne Creek. And we're at the second property right there. It's going to completely wash us out. And we're building a tiny home community to help those in need. And it's gonna ruin our valley. I'm just convinced of it. Looking at these pictures and the washout, and it's just gonna, and I want to make a statement. I am convinced that this is going to ruin the property, that valley, with all the runoff and the sediment, everything. And I'm just 100% against the clear cut. Select cut is a much better way to go.
Yeah.
Did you have something? No. Yes, sir.
Well, the main thing I wanted to say is, I know people tell us what it's going to do, but I like to trust what I see with my own eyes. And when the new road went through from Pine Knot to Williamsburg, the college cut all their tops and trees before they lost access to the roads. And they neighbor me on 3 sides of me. Now what I've seen is on a place that I've known all my life and never had an issue. I've got 3 slides on it that has taken out county roads where you can't even go past it. My uncle here lives on Jellico Creek Road, and they had that major slide that's blocked the road 2 or 3 times already, and that never happened until it got cut. So, and everywhere I see around here, if you drive from Jellico Creek area back to Williamsburg, now when the leaves are off the tree, you just see a terrible looking forest all the way to the road, just from where you see the roads. This gentleman here, when he showed his pictures, I was like, wow, he did that in my neighborhood, because that's what you see is you see this and it just washes down. So, and I've seen that, so I don't have to need a study or nothing to know if you do this, this is what happens. And I've got grandkids that think that my place is a magical place, and I'm the 8th generation to own it, and I would love it to be there for the 10th generation. So that's all I got.
I think there's goods and lots of bads and lots of goods with the meeting and with the Forest Service too. I mean, I've seen a lot of work with the Forest Service, and I think a lot of what people don't understand is these people live, eat, and breathe in the woods. I mean, they understand it. It's their whole life. It's some have gone to school with, some have grown up and grandkids or their grandparents that have worked with the Forest Service, and they think they don't love the trees. Now, I know a lot of the plans may be misconstrued or maybe misunderstood, and a lot of people have really, really, really good concerns for it, and I do myself too. I live in Whitley County. And I know that their plans are just to destroy the forest. I like to see things also from a wildlife perspective of it, because I see a lot of work, and we look at it, and I talk to a lot of people who do a lot of work on wildlife management areas as well. And I know if you have a really thick canopy, this is just one small portion of even their plan to begin with. But even with a thick canopy, wildlife have a really hard time trying to find somewhere to graze. And I think when you deplete not only from cutting forests, but also from communities, is you see a lot of wildlife looking for somewhere to graze. And we love them, being in our yards and being in our fields. I love seeing the wildlife myself, and that's something that everyone here I'm sure can relate to. But we wonder about the Forest Service. Not only do they consider their economy and what they're making and putting back, is they're helping wildlife, whether it be endangered species, whether it be very, very common native species. And there's things that I know that these Forest Service folks have considered and that they do plan for and that they do study each step of the way. But I also really understand a lot of the concerns for all of the wildlife and the slides and the clear cutting. There's, like everyone else has mentioned too, there's right and wrong ways to do things. And I just really want to have faith in the Forest Service that they consider each step of the way, how they affect the forest for now and 100 years to come, how they affect everybody that lives around it, how they affect the streams and ecology in general. That's all I'm going to say. I just have faith that they're going to do the best they can.
Yeah, I want to say. All right, who's next? Thank you. Yes, Janice. Janice in the back. Oh, you two duke it out. You go. All right.
When does the December 5th have to be in the office, postmarked, comments?
I think that's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Postmark, yeah. Postmark, yeah.
You said that for Stearns in person. I've got 130-something and growing questions, and I'm not even trying to present them.
All right.
Two things I want to mention.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
I can't believe you're gonna kill the grapevines. Did you know that every grape is treated? Vine growing around the world has grafting material from grapevines in North America because they're the only ones that's got the disease that killed all the rest of them. The grapevines grow up into that canopy. They start out with that tree, and they make a nice place for wildlife. Based on my calculations, I'll be 112 when this plan is finally finished. So I got to go. But as a kid growing up in my age now, I've not seen a tree die. Not even from kudzu. Who introduced kudzu? USFS. My last point is we've got in the area involved, we've got River Gym, Blue Gym, and Jellico Coal. Now, all of it has been strip mined in one form or another. Some of it before the new rules prior to 1977, and some of that got re-stripped. And it's all pretty much taken care of itself because the coal operators put it back according to where they're supposed to. But if something gets changed up above, it causes more water to go where they would not have otherwise went or have been going in the last 25 to 30 years. I think we're going to have some bad results. And I will be submitting my list, and I think it'll give you around 40 or 50 questions and concerns.
Thank you, sir. Rightfully starting to depart. We've been here now for an hour and a half. I did want to make sure, folks, and the Forest Service folks have helped me put this together. Just a second. I will get to Jen. But in case you're leaving, this is the information for submitting comments. You have these forms, the hard copy forms, this gentleman asked. They need to be in by December 5th. I wouldn't wait and try and deal with postmark this, that. Get them in by December 5th if you want to be part of this. And you can go on their website. Just go to the U.S. Forest Service website. It's on here if you want to take a picture of this. You can also go to jmlogging.com. That's easy. That's the website that the community made, and there's a link to how to submit comments on there as well. But for anybody who's leaving, get your comments in. What you said here today is being recorded, but that does not qualify as a public comment, right? Who told me that? The gentleman here. All right? Now, it's being taken into consideration, but that's not the official. You need to get in here. You heard what your neighbor said. You heard what the Forest Service folks are helping us understand. So get that in there. And then pay attention to how to do it. Specific comments next. You can't just say, I want y'all to go away. Yeah, go away. I don't want any of this. That's not going to help these guys. You have to be specific. All right. For those of you who are leaving. Okay, we're going to continue. Before this woman, we're going to go to Janice. Miss Janice Music.
Yeah, I'm on Jellico Creek, and I'm kind of in the middle of this whole land. Clear cutting, I'm totally against clear cutting. I think it is too destructive. All the reasons that many of you mentioned, the erosion that happens, the way it impacts our creeks, the creeks going into the river. It's very far-reaching. I'm also an organic vegetables grower, so a huge concern is the herbicides. You can't guarantee that the wind's not going to blow them when you're putting them down. You can't guarantee that it's not going to get in the water and wash out your crops. If my crops are contaminated, I can't sell them. So, and you know, that's one thing. Then it's just the impact on all of our health. This is up in the mountains. Everything that's up there comes down. Amen. You know, one way or another. And so it's going to impact our health and my children's health, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. Not to mention the view. I can turn all the way around at my home and see beautiful mountains. And I don't want to lose that. I want my kids to enjoy that. I want my grandkids, my great-grandkids, and on and on. You know, so I think selective cutting is traditionally what's been successful. Many of the people that have logged have said that. They've seen it work without all the invasive things and the herbicides. You know, so I just think this is way too massive and a destructive plan.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. My name's Patty, and I am one of the people that came from Fayette County, and I do come to this area to car camp and see all those beautiful leaves, and it's magnificent here. And what I think we should do in this area is build trails and not cut down trees. And because this is a place where everybody should want to come and go hiking. This is a magnificent area. And, you know, if you look back when the settlers first came here to Kentucky, and what was on this landscape, it was all trees. And so if the Forest Service looked at this whole state at this point and said, we need this percentage to be for these animals and this percentage and divvy it up, that's fine. But right now, the amount of forest that's left in this state is scant, okay, compared to what we used to have. And we need to protect our forest and revere our forest. It's precious. And then the last thing is that old trees are not decrepit. They are not needing to be put in a nursing home for trees. Okay? Old growth trees protect the young trees. And there's a book, Dr. Suzanne Simard, or however you say her name, she's from Canada, but Professor Simard did all of this research about old growth trees and how they feed the young trees. And if the old growth trees go away, then that kind of protection, just like your grandparents take care of the little kids when you're working. Well, these big trees take care of the new growth in the forest and help it survive whatever's coming, rainstorms and whatever. So that's all.
Are we done? Thank you. All right. Oh, sorry. Bob's trying to go again.
I just had one thing to say, and I keep hearing about select cutting. If you care about the forest and the environment, That is the way that you would care about us and the forest. It's selective cutting. To go in and get junk, but you don't need to cut everything down.
All right, Jim. According to this, position about trade,
Hit the mic.
hit the mic. I don't know, anybody here want to say it before? Probably not. I'm a retired physician, and I'm a kind of an amateur botanist. But there's something, Andrew, I think, made a very valid point about the grapevines. But we have species of trees around here that, within a 100-mile radius of Knoxville, we have a tree, the Stewartia ovale, the non-camellia. It only grows in this one area. It's down in the Smokies and it's up in here. We have 95% at least of the varied types of vegetation that you would see in the Smokies. So who plays God? Who gets to decide this tree is worthless, we're going to poison it, or that grapevine's worthless, we're going to poison it? Anybody said who plays God here?
Catherine?
So that's my only question. Everybody's got valid concerns, erosion, stuff. But we got this varied species of trees and stuff that exist nowhere else in the world. We've got 5 species of native magnolia. They're junk trees. You can't make timber out of them. They don't grow real big. What do you do with them? Poison them? So what I'm saying is that's selective cutting.
Yeah.
That, I've never seen a good result from clear cutting in this part of the world. Out west, it seems to work. Here it doesn't seem to work. Thank you.
I just have one more thing.
Oh, can you hold your comment? There's still some folks that haven't spoken. Thank you.
I'm a logger. I've been a logger since I was 14-year-old and 37-year-old. I'm a steward of Tim and Teresa's land. I hunt it. As far as Miss Debbie Moses' property, I've been on it since I was a kid. I used to drink out of the start of Jackson Creek. You no longer drink out of Jackson Creek. It is slid. There's a slate. Me and Timmy call it the slate cut or whatever. But as a logger, I've logged Wolf Creek. And as a result of what I logged 7 to 8 years ago, the state came in, they said, yes, the roads look good, the water bars look good, the silt fences look good. You didn't cross the creek, you didn't drop hydraulic fluid, you look good to go. They released me off the timber. The road slid, and how long was you with the road slid up there at Arliss's, on past Arliss's, on Phil's property? That was a result of us clear cutting the top of that mountain, and it couldn't absorb the water. So the water came down and it found a spot to get in the ground, and it slid and it cut across the road. It flooded Little Wolf Creek. People lost homes, people lost beehives, and you might just say it's a beehive, but that's something somebody's worked for. It's something somebody's put a lot of effort into. And we've got to have it.
Yeah, it turns out.
But select cutting is a good thing. But if we do clear cut and come in and cut all this national forest, we have to drive an hour and a half to see undisturbed, beautiful, natural forest. We shouldn't have to do that. We're citizens here. We live here. We pay the taxes for these guys to work right here.
Right.
And the government's lied to us before. They've been a big lie. And I know you guys have a job to do, and I respect you because I have to work with the Forestry Service daily. But the thing is, if we lose this boy's grandkids will never see what we're seeing right now. That's all I got to say.
Yes, sir.
Harrison, I live down in the creek on Osborne, and why not cut trails through that? I think the reason why is because y'all won't crop it up. So this is an impoverished area. Like the guy said earlier, is the greatest opportunity for economic growth in this area is tourism, not logging. We don't profit off the logging. Y'all do. That's all I got to say. Is we get nothing out of it.
Thank you. Anyone? This gentleman wants to go again. And Bob wants to go again too, but go ahead.
So as for old growth, I know you're talking about old growth. We're obviously not from here. Anyway, we're from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Huge old growth, hundreds of years old. Forest is amazing out there. Absolutely stunningly beautiful. Very strict up there. They do have select cutting. It works amazing. Love it. As for what's going on here, I think we need to worry more about the invasive species that are in the forest and take care of that before we're really worried about doing any of the other stuff. We have a lot of invasive weeds and trees and stuff that are kind of making havoc. So that was just my last thoughts. And that's it.
Those of you that live in McCrory County, and this may be a selfish thing to say, but next week read an article in the newspaper called Mighty Big Trees. It is the most beautiful article, and it goes to what Julius Campbell talked about. And also thank you for those who set up the program.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up, folks. Feels like it. All right, a lot of
copies of what they've had up on the screen. Like your definitions of all the clear cut, how many percentage and all that. Do you have copies of that?
Copies here, it's all available on our domain.
All right, folks, I think we're good. I want to thank you all. Here are some resources if you want to take a picture. The U.S. Forest Service has resources. You can get to most of the links. We're trying really hard to keep it up to date. This jmlogging.com will take you to all the things that the Forest Service folks are doing. We'll keep it up to date. We'll put news out there. We're trying to keep you all informed. I want to thank and I want to give a round of applause for